drop everything, because today was one of those rare days where the information didn't trickle in. It flooded, and every single piece connects to something bigger happening inside this franchise right now. Todd McShay, one of the most plugged-in draft analysts in the business, just put real heat behind a possible Cowboys trade all the way up to the number 3 overall pick, and the name attached to that buzz doesn't just change the conversation. It reframes the entire draft strategy. There's also a separate scenario quietly making the rounds that would bring a proven Vikings edge rusher to Dallas for nothing more than a modest swap of picks, which, depending on how you look at it, might actually be the smarter play. Then there's a hybrid pass rusher available in the 3rd round, right around the exact pick Dallas owns, a prospect worth knowing by name before he's off the board. And on top of all that, Jalen Thompson is getting the kind of recognition this week that Cowboys Nation absolutely needs to hear, because the full picture of what that signing means hasn't been properly told yet. Stay with me through every bit of this, because by the end you're going to have an opinion on all 4, and I genuinely want to hear where you land. Start with the name Romelu Height, because if you haven't heard it yet, you're about to hear it a lot as the draft gets closer. Height is a prospect with a resume that looks unconventional at first glance, and honestly, it is. Auburn, USC, Georgia Tech, Texas Tech. For programs across 6 years of college football. On the surface, that kind of movement might read as instability or a player who never found his footing, but sit with it for a moment and a different story starts to take shape. What that path actually represents is persistence through adversity, a willingness to adapt and rebuild repeatedly, and the kind of mental resilience that NFL teams quietly value because the league demands exactly that from players who want to stick around. Height didn't transfer because things were going great. He transferred because he kept searching for the situation that would allow him to develop, and at Texas Tech, he finally found it. What the Cowboys would be getting with Height is an athletic profile that any defensive coordinator working in today's NFL would notice immediately. His get-off is elite. That initial burst off the line of scrimmage, the split-second explosion the moment the ball moves, is the kind of trait that either exists or it doesn't, and with Height, it exists. Even in situations where an offensive tackle has set wide specifically to cut off the corner, Height uses his speed to compensate and still finds his way to the quarterback through the longer, harder path. That's not desperation. That's a player who has internalized what his skill set can do and leans on it with confidence. Over those 6 college years, he developed a pass rush arsenal that includes a refined dip-and-rip technique, a move that lets him get underneath the pads of larger blockers without needing to overpower them physically. That's technique. Technique that takes time to build. And at 6 feet 3 inches, 238 pounds with speed that shows on tape, he enters this draft as one of the more intriguing late-round flyers available. There's a dimension to Height's profile that makes him particularly interesting for what Christian Parker is building in Dallas specifically. He can cover. Not every pass rusher can do that, and most can't do it with the fluidity that Height shows in sub-packages. He can stick with running backs and tight ends on short routes well enough that keeping him on the field in obvious passing situations doesn't immediately tip the defense to the opposing quarterback. That matters enormously in today's league, where pre-snap reads happen in a fraction of a second, and any alignment tell can cost a defense a play. Parker spent time learning from Vic Fangio and Vance Joseph, 2 of the NFL's most respected defensive minds, and both of those coaches built defenses around players who could do multiple things at once, fast, versatile, capable of creating confusion before the ball even gets snapped. Height fits that mold more naturally than most of the edge options available in the 3rd round. His limitations aren't hidden, and they're the exact reason he won't be drafted in the first 2 rounds. At his size, when larger offensive linemen get their hands on him first in the run game, he struggles to disengage and shed. His tackling technique runs high, which becomes a liability in open field situations where the ball carrier has already cleared the line. These are real developmental concerns, not minor footnotes. But the Cowboys hold pick 92, a selection that came over in the Osa Odigizua trade with San Francisco, and that's precisely where Height is projected to land. The math on a 3rd-round pass rush specialist makes sense when the player brings elite speed, legitimate technique, and genuine coverage flexibility. You aren't betting first-round capital on him becoming a starter. You're making a smart developmental investment on a player whose ceiling, if the run defense limitations get coached up, is genuinely exciting. At 92, Romulo Height is a bet worth making. Let me know in the comments whether you take him there. Now, let me shift to something that carries entirely different weight, because Todd McShay doesn't float rumors for engagement. When he says there's buzz, it's because he's actually hearing something from within league circles. And what he said this week about the Cowboys specifically is worth examining carefully. On his podcast, McShay stated there is significant buzz around Dallas potentially moving up in the first round, and he directly connected the franchise to the Arizona Cardinals' number 3 overall pick as the logical destination. The target, according to McShay, would be Abdul Carter. Wait, I need to correct that. The target he connected to that conversation is David Bailey, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech, who is widely projected as the top outside pass rusher in this entire draft class. And if that name sounds familiar in the context of this video, it should, because it's the same player who came up earlier this week on this channel. That's not a coincidence. That's a convergence of information pointing in a consistent direction, and that deserves serious attention. The football argument for going up and getting Bailey isn't hard to make. Dallas finished the 2025 season tied for 28th in the league in sacks. The defense surrendered 511 points. Rashawn Gary addresses part of that problem, but he doesn't solve it comprehensively, and anyone who watched this defense last season knows that one pass rusher, regardless of how talented, isn't going to flip those numbers alone. Bailey posted 14.5 sacks in his final college season at Texas Tech and generates pressure in a way that Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network has described as exceptional. McShay was direct about the connection. Texas Tech pass rusher, Dallas Cowboys, pick 3, and a franchise that has made rebuilding the defense its clearest organizational priority. The logic tracks. The profile fits. The need is real. The price, though, is where this conversation gets uncomfortable. Dallas owns picks 12 and 20 in this draft. Combined, using the NFL's standard trade value chart, those two selections are worth approximately 2,250 points. The Cardinals' number 3 pick is valued at 2,200 points. On paper, that's nearly equivalent, but in practice, trading 2 first-round picks for one, even one that high, is a transaction that changes the entire shape of a draft class. The Cowboys enter this draft with a single second-round pick, meaning if picks 12 and 20 go to Arizona, Dallas is essentially operating from the 3rd round onward to fill the remaining needs on a roster that still has legitimate holes at linebacker, safety, and cornerback depth. That isn't just aggressive roster building. That's betting nearly the entire draft on one player being transformative from the moment he arrives. And if a partial bridge to 2027 picks is required to get the Cardinals to the table, which is entirely possible given how rare this kind of trade is, the exposure compounds further. I understand the pull. Bailey is the kind of prospect that doesn't come around often, and when an analyst with McShay's track record and league access puts your franchise in that specific conversation, Cowboys Nation can't dismiss it. But 2 first-round picks plus potential future capital demands absolute certainty that Bailey becomes a cornerstone pass rusher in year 1. And in the NFL draft, absolute certainty simply doesn't exist. What is certain is that Dallas is being discussed league-wide as a franchise willing to move aggressively if the right opportunity presents itself. And that posture alone changes how other teams negotiate around them. Comment below whether you pull the trigger on Bailey at 3, because I want to know where the fan base stands on this one. 2 completely different bets sitting on the same table. Height at 92, low risk, versatile, no first-round capital touched. Bailey at 3, potentially franchise-altering, but at the cost of everything Dallas has built in this draft. I've thought through both multiple times, and I genuinely go back and forth. Which one would you choose? Drop it in the comments. Here's where I want to shift the conversation, because while everyone has been focused on the Bailey debate, there's a quieter scenario making the rounds that might actually solve the pass rush equation more efficiently than either of the options above. Cowboys wire from USA Today laid out a proposal where Dallas sends pick 12 to the Minnesota Vikings in exchange for pick 18 and edge rusher Jonathan Greenid, who is currently in the third year of a 4-year, $76 million contract. Dallas moves down 6 spots in the first round, lands at 18, and adds a proven veteran pass rusher in the process. That's the structure of the deal. Now let me tell you why it deserves to be taken seriously. Greenid is not an unknown commodity. In 2024, he played his best football as a Viking, registering 12 sacks, 59 tackles, and 18 tackles for loss, a personal career high across every meaningful category. Those are numbers that would have ranked inside the top tier of pass rushers in the league in any season. The problem is 2025. A shoulder injury emerged early. He attempted to push through it for weeks, underwent surgery after week 15, and ended the year with just 3 sacks across 12 games. The production drop was sharp and undeniable, and that's the exact reason why Minnesota is rumored to be open to moving him and why the Cowboys have already been identified among teams showing initial interest. The element that keeps this door genuinely open is a comment Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell made at the league meetings this week. When asked directly about Greenid's future with the team, O'Connell said he expects Greenid to be part of the team, but then immediately added that conversations are happening this week and that the organization intends to continue attacking things in different phases. That is not the language of a closed door. That is a coach deliberately leaving space open while discussions are still active. Coaches who are fully committed to keeping a player don't add qualifiers like that in public settings. And the technical detail that makes a trade like this cleaner to execute is that the Vikings have not yet restructured Greenid's contract, meaning the existing terms don't require a complex renegotiation before a deal can be finalized. From Dallas's perspective, the Cowboys' wire proposal works precisely because of its restraint. No first-round picks are surrendered entirely. 2027 capital stays intact, and the return is an edge rusher who, across his last 2 fully healthy seasons, produced 24 sacks. Rashawn Gary and Jonathan Greenid on the same defensive line would be a pass rush pairing this franchise hasn't seen since the years when this team was genuinely feared defensively. A healthy Greenid is not the player who limped through 2025 on a damaged shoulder. The talent base that produced that Pro Bowl 2024 campaign doesn't disappear because of one injury, and betting on it with a 6-spot slide and no loss of future picks is a considerably smarter risk than surrendering 2 first-rounders for a college player, regardless of how highly rated that college player is. Comment below if you'd make this trade with Minnesota. There's one more story from this week that I want to make sure Cowboys Nation fully understands, because the numbers are out there, but the context around them hasn't been properly told. Pro Football Focus published their rankings of the best signings from the entire NFL free agency period this offseason. Not just in the NFC, not just in the division, across the whole league, and Jalen Thompson's arrival in Dallas was listed among the top signings anywhere. That's significant. But the significance goes deeper than the grade when you understand what Thompson's signing actually represents for this franchise. Before Dallas signed Thompson to a 3-year, $33 million deal on March 9th, the Cowboys had not signed an external free agent for more than $6 million since Gerald McCoy in 2020. 6 years. 6 consecutive offseasons where the franchise's primary roster-building tools were the draft and internal development, with the open market treated almost as a last resort. Adam Wells of Bleacher Report had highlighted that near-total avoidance of meaningful free agency spending as one of the team's core structural vulnerabilities back in January, and he wasn't wrong. The over-reliance on the draft and internal trades to fill every hole created a roster-building rigidity that left Dallas exposed whenever the draft didn't hit or a key player's development stalled. Thompson broke that pattern, and he did it in a way that goes beyond the dollar amount. It's an organizational statement about how this front office, under its current structure, intends to operate going forward. Now let's talk about what Thompson actually brings to the field, because PFF's recognition isn't promotional. It's based on consistent, measurable performance data. Thompson spent 6 seasons with the Arizona Cardinals playing alongside Budda Baker, one of the most decorated safeties of the past decade, And even in that shadow, Thompson built a completely independent resume. PFF recorded him with grades between 68 and 72 in 5 of his last 6 seasons. That's not a player peaking occasionally and then declining. That's sustained performance at a high level across a long span, which is genuinely rare at the safety position. In 2025 specifically, his 69.2 coverage grade ranked him inside the top 30 among all 93 safeties PFF evaluated across the league. For context, that's a top third finish in a position group where consistency is notoriously difficult to maintain. ESPN's Todd McShay added a layer to the Thompson evaluation that the raw numbers don't capture. Thompson communicates. He organizes the secondary in real time, gets players into their proper alignments before the snap, and functions as a quarterback of the back end. That role is always valuable, but in a first year under Christian Parker installing a new defensive scheme with multiple new starters at once, it becomes critical. Training camp and the early part of the 2026 season will be a period of genuine adjustment, and having a veteran safety who can serve as a coach on the field, who can recognize what's broken before it becomes a disaster, is the kind of investment that doesn't appear in the Week 1 box score, but absolutely shows up in the Week 8 standings. Thompson turns 28 in July, which puts him squarely in his prime for the full duration of the 3-year agreement. There is no age cliff to worry about. There's no injury history that raises long-term concerns. The deal is clean, the role is defined, and the fit is real. With picks 12 and 20 available, the expectation is that at least one of those selections targets the defense. Whether it's an edge rusher, a linebacker, or a corner depends on how the board falls. And Thompson would anchor the back end while those rookies find their footing. Cowboys Nation spent years watching this franchise refuse to open the checkbook in free agency for a real starter. When they finally did, they found the right player at the right position at the right stage of his career. Comment below whether you liked the Thompson signing, because it deserves more credit than it's been getting. Let me close by tying all 4 threads together because they each represent a different philosophy about how to build this roster toward contention. Height in the 3rd round is the low-risk play. A versatile, fast, technically refined pass rusher who costs nothing of consequence and carries genuine upside if his run defense limitations get corrected. McShay's buzz around Bailey at 3 is the high-conviction bet, transformative on paper, but requiring Dallas to surrender both first-round picks and potentially future capital to bring a college player in and immediately expect him to fix one of the league's most troubled defenses. The Greenwood trade is the middle road, a proven veteran, a demonstrated track record over 2 healthy seasons, an injury that explains the asking price without diminishing the ceiling, all in exchange for nothing more than a modest draft slot slide. And Thompson signing is the foundation. 6 years of Jerry Jones keeping the free agency checkbook locked, followed by a well-targeted, well-timed investment in exactly the kind of experienced, communicative, durable player that a first-year coordinator needs, anchoring his secondary. This franchise is moving on every level simultaneously. The draft is 3 weeks away. The decisions that get made between now and that Thursday night in Green Bay will define the competitive window that's opening, and I'm tracking every development as it happens. If you've made it to the end of this, you already know where you stand on these 4 questions. Drop your takes in the comments because this space belongs to every member of Cowboys Nation, and I want to hear from all of you.